Okay, so this morning, like I said, we have a very special event. What we're going to do this morning is we have a panel of master and exceptional teachers here with us today who have offered to share great advice about teaching and then to talk to you specifically about some of the teaching strategies that they utilize in their classrooms. So we're going to start off. I'm going to do some introductions to our outstanding faculty members who are up here in just one moment. But beforehand, I want to run you through the program of events. We're going to start with just a question and answer session for the panel, and then on each of your tables there's a card, and it's got a best practice in teaching. And so each of the panelists are going to share their ideas about a certain practice in teaching, a strategy in teaching that they utilize in their classrooms and they wanted to share with you. So what we're going to do in our distance locations is we're actually going to have one table in the back. That's the table right there. Amy, Mona, and our other guests who are there. So our distance folks will have a faculty member back there with you to share strategies at that table. So we'll move around a little bit when we get there. Okay? So before I introduce our panelists, I also want to introduce my co-host for the morning, which is Dr. Brian Gee. Brian is an associate professor and department chair of the Department of Physical and Occupational Therapy here at ISU. And also, we have another co-host who's not with us today, Dr. Cindy Hill. And this was actually Cindy's idea. So I want to thank Cindy for coming up with this great idea in sharing teaching strategies. So Cindy will be coming in a little bit later, but I just want to introduce both of them, too. So, without further... Oh, there she is.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Hi, Cindy. It's like we planned that. So, I want to introduce each one of our panelists. So, when I say your name, if you could just give a little wave to the crowd. First, we'll start with Mark Macbeth. So, Mark is a professor of political science. He's been on the faculty at ISU since January of 1995. He teaches courses in public administration and politics, and he was named a master teacher in 2001 and a distinguished teacher in 2005. And in our small group discussion today, Mark will be talking about strategies for incorporating case teaching in the social sciences. So, Mark, welcome. Next, we have Bethany Schultz-Hurst. Bethany is a poet, and now Bethany, you might have to help me with some pronunciations here. So I practiced these, but I'm not sure they're right. Whose book, Miss Lost Nation, won the Aninga Poetry Prize and was a finalist for the Kate Tufts Discovery Award. Her work has appeared in Best American Poetry and in journals such as the Gettysburg Review, Gulf Coast, Narrative, New Ohio Review, and Plowshares. The Idaho Commission on the Arts recently awarded her a literature fellowship. She's an associate professor in ISU's Department of English and Philosophy, where she teaches creative writing and composition courses. Bethany was awarded the ISU Distinguished Teaching Award in 2008. And in our small group discussion today, she'll be talking about ways to improve instructor and peer feedback on student writing. So, Bethany, welcome. Next, we have Robin Lindbeck. Robin is an associate professor in the Department of Organizational Learning and Performance in the College of Education. Robin teaches in the undergraduate program in workplace training and leadership and in the master degree program in human resource development. Both of these programs are fully online. Prior to joining ISU 7 years ago, Robin spent over 25 years heading up training and development departments and consulting for a variety of national and global companies. Robin's been recognized by her faculty colleagues and her dean as an outstanding teacher, and today in our small group discussion, she'll be talking about best practices for the online classroom. So Robin, thank you for being here with us today. Next, we have Don Konachek. Don is an assistant clinical professor in the College of Business. Dawn holds an accounting degree from the University of Whitewater, Wisconsin, where she graduated cum laude and immediately accepted a job at one of the nation's premier accounting firms. Her experience with accounting firms is extensive, ranging from Fortune 500 companies to small mom-and-pop shops. After completing her Master's of Business Administration, she began teaching at the community college level and found she had a desire to go bigger. and teach students to become CPAs, not just bookkeepers. Therefore, she pursued a teaching career at a four-year university, ISU, we're so lucky to have her, and began her full-time teaching career here 6 years ago. 2018 was a big year for Dawn. She earned her PhD in May and was recognized as an ISU master teacher in that same year. So in our small group discussion today, Dawn will be talking to us about strategies for active learning. So Dawn, thank you for being with us this morning. Next, Dr. Alex Urfer. Alex is a professor emeritus and adjunct professor and holds a dual appointment in the Department of Biological Sciences and the Department of Physical and Occupational Therapy. He earned his BA in Health Education from Montclair State, his MA and PhD in Exercise Physiology from Ohio State University. Now, I noticed you didn't put the article in front of the Ohio.
No, it should be
the Ohio State University. Just want to clarify. And his graduate certification in physical therapy from the Mayo Clinic. He served as the department chair in physical therapy at ISU from 1990 to 2009 and teaches in the areas of biomechanics, orthopedics, and has research interests in prosthesis, clinical physical therapy, cardiovascular, therapeutic exercise. He was the recipient of the ISU Master Teacher Award in 1982 and the ISU Distinguished Teaching Award in 2005. Today, in our small group discussion, Alex will be talking about strategies to address critical thinking through applied case presentations in the health professions. Alex, thank you for being with us this morning. Next, Darren Levitz. Darren is a coordinator and instructor in the Civil Engineering Technology program in the College of Technology. He has over 25 years of experience as a professional land surveyor and has a vast amount of experience as an owner and president of a land surveying business and a 3D scanning business. Very cool stuff. Darren currently teaches using a variety of different modalities, face-to-face, online, and distance learning, and has been recognized by his faculty colleagues and his dean as an outstanding teacher. Today in our small group discussion, Darren will be sharing his expertise in coordinating effective strategies in the distance learning classroom. So Darren, thank you very much for being here this morning. And last but certainly not least is Paul Link. Paul is a professor in the Department of Geosciences here at ISU and specializes in regional sedimentary geology. He received his BS from Yale University and PhD from UC Santa Barbara and began teaching at ISU in 1980. He was the director of the 5-week ISU Geology Summer Field Camp at Lost River Field Station north of Mackay, Idaho from 2002 to 2016. I bet you have lots of stories to share from that time period. Paul was recognized as an ISU master teacher in both 2013 and 2014. And today in our small group discussion, he'll be sharing his expertise on strategies for teaching in the field. So Paul, thank you for being here with us today. It's very hard to do short introductions to such distinguished folks. So thank you for allowing me to introduce you all today. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Brian, and Brian's going to start our panel questions.
So I have a list of like 10 questions that I generated if I was to sit where you're sitting there. I tried to develop questions that were more pragmatic for faculty that would be new or faculty that might want to reinvigorate their teaching. So I think for the sake of time, what we could do is you don't all have to answer this, but if each question, but if you have like, if you're dying to respond, you can. So the first question is always, I look at my personal trajectory has been, I left clinical practice and changed practice settings to come into teaching. So teaching in higher education is a different practice setting. So I always wonder from faculty, especially our distinguished panel, what led you to the teaching role in higher education? What was the catalyst, or what was the facilitator or the experience? Any thoughts on that?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is the desire to give back. It gave, going through the industry for many, many years, you kind of come full circle, and it was this notion that having professors and instructors and mentors in my life that made a difference in my professional career, that's kind of what I wanted to be. And so my desire to give back to the students and the upcoming generation, if you will, that's kind of what led me back to
Excellent.
the seat.
Okay. Other thoughts from our group?
I'll go next because
Sure.
mine's the same.
Okay.
Ditto.
Ditto.
And I found that just because two reasons. One, because you can have a greater impact, right? Because every one student that you prepare, then they impact that many more people. But also, I know how much I valued having professors who had practical real-world experience, and so I felt I was able to bring that to my teaching as well.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of took a different path. I've been a fellow with a lifelong speech impediment. And when I was going through high school and college, I had some excellent teachers, and then I had some terrible teachers. And I thought that it would be a wonderful thing, number one, to become more fluent and also serve as a catalyst for lifelong learning, to develop individuals in higher education so that they can be successful in their careers, and you do that with good teaching and good mentorship.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Other thoughts?
I never had it on my radar to be a teacher. I was being prepped to become partner of a big firm in Wisconsin. They liked how I trained the interns and staff, and I continued to do that, and I really liked that. And it made me feel good.
Yeah.
I was preparing these students. I was preparing their professional life, and I just felt really good about it. So they hated losing me because they were prepping me to become partner, but I did take this role because I love it. Absolutely love it.
Excellent.
I'll just chime in that I also love the idea of giving back and kind of paying back my mentors in a way. But also selfishly, I love teaching because it keeps my learning really fresh. I think that my understanding of the field would have stagnated without it, and my students really challenge me to stay on top of what's happening in contemporary poetry. So I think I have a really selfish motive too, that I just find it really exciting to be able to talk with people who also love creative writing and poetry on almost a daily basis, and I don't know where else I'd be able to do that. So.
Excellent.
Yeah, so my answer is very similar to Bethany. I love learning, and so teaching is kind of the ideal job if you like to learn. And I always make an argument to young faculty that I learned my field not from my doctorate, but from teaching for the last 24 years. And I learn a great deal from students, and then of course watching them learn, watching them evolve. And one of the neat things about ISU is you get to see students from the time they're freshmen all the way up to graduate students, and you see them evolve and learn. So it's just a great, rewarding career.
Okay.
And my career, so it sort of stems from enthusiasm for geology in the first place and enjoyment of doing geology, and then and for me, teaching and research are all part of the same thing. You know, you have students and graduate students, and the graduate students are doing research, and then you're learning about that stuff, and then you're passing that on, and your teaching changes with your research. So it's sort of the whole, the academic life is all part of the enthusiasm for the field, I think.
Okay. Excellent. One of my questions as we went through this, as I developed these, was I wanted to know, as you guys have taught, what's the most significant innovation, whether it be with instructional technology or pedagogy, that really has supported student learning? So outside of fads and things like that, but what's been a really consistent pedagogy or instructional technology that's really influenced student learning as you've worked with students over the years?
I'll start again. What we see in the back of the room.
Yeah.
For me, it's the audio-visual
Yeah.
stuff that's taken us by storm. The brick and mortar of education, higher education, is changing rapidly. And for me, that's been the reason.
Yeah.
I'll go semi-ditto this time.
Okay, so Semicolon.
Semicolon. So definitely technology and distance learning technology and online technologies, those sorts of things. But in particular for me, whether it's previously when I taught face-to-face or currently in asynchronous online, it's the ability to integrate other smaller technologies that allow students to collaborate and to connect while they're in a distance environment. Because even my face-to-face students were non-traditional, full-time working students, so they weren't on campus all the time. So this ability to connect them has always been important.
Okay. Do you have any examples of those small little bits of technology that you're using that seem to help with?
Sure.
Yeah. What's
well,
working?
Everybody I know is familiar with Google Suites, and so we use the Google Suite programs a lot in our classes to help students connect.
Yeah.
But we also, because we're asynchronous, we rely on discussion boards. And so as an alternative to only using discussion boards, we use VoiceThread, which allows students to respond to some sort of prompt. We have someone in our college this semester that's using something that just came out last summer that I'm going to be using in a couple of weeks, which is called Flipgrid, which again is a very easy way for students to use their cell phones or their computer to record 90-second responses to any kind of prompt. So it's great for introductions, and for those of us who are fully asynchronously online, it's helpful to get people's pronunciation of their names. So those kinds of things, as well as polling, and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Excellent. Other thoughts from the group?
Small technology.
Yeah.
I teach a 3-hour tax class. I've learned how to have to make it very engaging. It can be dry. A little humor can go a long way, but Kahoots. I'll lecture for a little bit, and then I'll use Kahoots. The students love their phones, and so when they, I'll put a question on it, and they'll. I'll use Kahoots and they'll all poll and, and then we'll talk about it. But that seems to engage them. It wakes them up.
Yeah.
So every 15 minutes. So lecture, Kahoots,
Cool.
lecture.
Yeah.
Kahoot.
So my answer would be a little different. It's more
Yeah.
on pedagogy. So in the last 10 or 15 years, I think I have a better understanding of how students learn, maybe how the brain works. And so just a few days ago, I pulled out one of my grade books. Remember when we used to have grade books from like 1995? And I was very traditional. I gave a midterm, a final, and I usually a paper. That was my 3 grades. And since then, I've learned a lot of things about redundancy and having students learn the same concept in different formats and having them apply. So I do a lot of small papers, a lot more active learning, a much less traditional. I think I'm better at getting them to critique and talk and discuss, and my classes are less about me and more about student learning. So I think the focus on learning and how students learn, that's been the major change for me over the last several years.
Okay.
I'll chime in with that. When I started teaching, I had more traditional the big writing assignments due, and I still have those due, but to scaffold those, I have many more smaller writing assignments that are very low stakes, and those are places where students can take risks and not worry about if they're meeting the criteria fully. So I think that's great to give them a space where they can try things that might not be a sure thing, and I think that's where they often grow. So building in those kinds of low stakes assignments, that's been something that's been useful for me as I've developed as a teacher.
Excellent.
Well, I guess I'm sort of I'm a low tech guy. I don't. I think writing is really important. I think looking at stuff in the field is really important. You don't need technology for any of those things. And where I have connected and done the best with students has been sort of in the immersion in the field, and it sort of seems to me, and I'm an older guy, I've been around, that technology is constantly threatening that. So, and I've taught on distance learning since 1990, so I think I know how that game goes. But Anyway,
Yeah.
Let me just jump in there. I agree 100%. I'm guessing we all agree 100% that you never want the technological tail to wag the pedagogical dog,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it always starts with pedagogy, always. I mean, that's probably why we're all up here, because we believe it all starts with pedagogy.
And that was the point of the question, was let's look at pedagogy. Because pedagogy tends to outlast technology in a lot of regards. Dr. Erfer.
In the sciences, specifically like anatomy, I think some of the technology, like we have this anatomage table where you can program the human body in all planes, in all pathologies, in all descriptors, and the information is immediate. And it's kind of scary when you're teaching that information, because students can look it up in a few seconds and let you know if you're right or wrong. And so that to me has been very, very important in relationship to not only make sure that you're current in your information that you're lecturing about, but also having this nice dovetail between what they may see on a screen or on their iPad or on their phone, and bringing it directly in a nice transitional pattern into the action, the actual dissection laboratory, which allows them to relate exactly to what they saw, to what they're dissecting.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, instead of talking directly about student instruction, going back in time, what would you tell your younger selves what do you know now that you would tell your younger selves as a new faculty member, a new educator, new instructor? What would you tell yourselves?
That teaching isn't about me.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is it not about me, but the student needs to be the center of their own learning experience, right? I mean, if we know the principles of adult learning, they need to be an active part of that, so that if I'm working harder in class than they are, I'm not doing it right. And that we need to flip that. I need to work hard in preparing what they're going to do once they come to class. But really, it is a spotlight on them, not a spotlight on me. It's student, not information centered.
Yeah.
When I initially started teaching, and when I would grade student rough drafts, and I would give the most detailed feedback and the most prescriptive feedback possible, I would basically rewrite their papers for them. And I would get really beautiful final drafts that were exactly what I wanted to see, because I had written the papers basically for the students. So it took me a little while to realize that hard work wasn't actually in service of the students' learning. And so I think just echoing that idea that it's not about me, but it's about me guiding their learning. So letting them struggle through that draft instead of me wanting to fix it all for them. I wish I had known that a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts?
So I just say my advice to myself would be, I'd be more patient with myself and with my students. That learning takes time, and that students might be struggling with their writing in my class, but they're learning in other ways, and you have to be patient. The other advice I'd give to myself is, in political science in particular, you have to interest students in the discipline first, and then get them hooked into the principles. Whereas when I started, I was talking about all these principles, political pluralism, all these things that are probably not that interesting in themselves. So now I flip things, I get them interested in political science, which is a fascinating topic. And then once I have them hooked and interested, then I teach them the principles. So I think those are the two things I'd give to my young self.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that, because it's really hard to get students interested in tax, and so I've had to, before I'm like just dove right into the code or into the rules, and they're just looking at me with their mouths open, so I had to show my passion and get them, and I have get them excited about it, and to think about it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why we have taxes, so I can go on about that. But.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I think I would learn how to manage my time better, because teaching can take an inordinate amount of time if you want to do it really well. And so I think you need to develop a balance of what it is that you're contributing to the learning process, and more importantly, what the student is contributing to that learning process. And that varies really in terms of undergraduate and graduate preparation, whereas graduate preparation, I think it's a lot more on self-learning with the student and faculty member serving as a mentor as compared to undergraduate.
Okay, excellent. So it's 2018. A lot has changed on campus in the past 4 to 5 months. I think there's a cultural change. I think there's challenges that we face as instructors with generations that come in. So I'm wondering, what do you feel like, what are the greatest opportunities for teaching in the classroom in 2018? What are you excited about? What motivates you in the classroom, given what's happening on campus or with the cohort of students that we have, or pedagogy or instructional technology? What do you guys think?
I can start.
Yeah.
So I'll start with the opportunities. So it is interesting. The generations, following generations, is fascinating. So in political science, there's a political scientist named Russell Dalton, and he studies young people in politics. And so the kind of common sense, conventional wisdom out there is young people don't like politics. But Russell Dalton's studies in his book called The Good Citizen suggests that this generation who will be in my introduction to politics class in 25 minutes, is actually the smartest, most diverse, and the most politically astute generation in U.S. history. And I noticed that in my classroom. And I've noticed it just in the last, year. Partially because I teach that book in the class, but I'm really excited about the future of our democracy, and that's something that's very difficult to say in 2018 in the United States. But I am, right now, I am very positive about the future of our democracy and teaching students political science, this generation in particular.
Excellent, thank you. Other thoughts or reflections on what do you think about the opportunities for teaching in 2018?
I kind of hate to follow that because that was awesome.
Yeah, no, that's
Mine's going to be much
you
more
nailed it.
maybe pedantic than that, but because our program is fully online and we're getting more and more support for fully online and distance here on campus, I'm really excited about the opportunity to serve more and more people in Idaho. Right? We are obviously a sparsely populated state, so there are people who would not have the opportunity were they not able to do it online, and so I continue to be excited about that.
Excellent, yeah.
And elsewhere. You start
Right.
looking at the online piece, and there's no reason why a student from any state or nation couldn't be taking classes from us. So that bigger picture of our offerings going beyond Bannock County.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Idaho.
Right.
Is,
I think one of the interesting things and certainly exciting things is that we, in our professions, we're seeing a lot more non-traditional students who have chosen to change their careers. I mean, markedly changing their careers. They're architects and now they want to be physical therapists, and they're 42 years old. And so that, I think, allows us a window to really understand the type of learning that these students respond to, and it allows us as faculty to really be mentors to those individuals so they can be successful with the decision.
Yeah, I certainly can echo that, Alex. Yeah. What do you think the barriers are in 2018? What are we concerned about in the classroom?
I think the barriers, I think we've got smart students, but I think they've been handheld a little bit too much. And I see that. And so what I do to try to cross that barrier is to give them the encouragement and challenge. But in many ways, by asking them questions in class, and if they've asked me a question, I'll challenge them. But I just see, I in my intermediate one class, I have a project, and the students don't want to do this project. Obviously, it's a long-winded project, accounting project, but this project is essential to their learning. And after a while, when they're done with that project, they'll come to me. They'll whine and complain at first, but then after that, they'll say, "Boy, I understand what accounting is really all about." So I got to kind of push a little bit, but I did the hand holding.
Yeah.
So I'll give another political answer to something. So the biggest barrier to me is financial aid debt and the fact that we don't fund public higher education anymore. So the New York Times had an article a couple weeks ago looked at different debt levels in the United States since 2009. We're doing okay, since the recovery, we're doing okay on everything except for financial aid debt is like this. And I am very worried about that. I'm also worried that we treat public higher education as a market, and public higher education is actually an institution. And we know institutions in this country are under attack. They're disintegrating, and I'm really worried about those two issues. How do we protect public higher education as an institution, and what do we do with financial aid debt? Do we start funding public education again because it's a public good, or do we just turn it into a market, in which case I think there's, for people like me who was a first-generation student, I'm actually a second-generation student, but I grew up in a first-generation family. I don't know, like in today's world, would I even go to college because I might not have the opportunities that I had 30 years ago as a student.
I guess I would say challenges are kids are they don't like to read. They don't read. You assign stuff in the textbook and they don't read it. And then you talk about it as if they read it, and they're like, look at you. And then, of course, the same stuff about they don't know how to write either. And this is actually, it's been very disturbing to me because I have writing in my senior level class. And kids go to the ISU writing lab, and the person at the writing lab reads it, and it's full of incomplete sentences, and the writing lab person says, oh, it's great, and then Link, writes all over it, and then the student gets mad. That's very upsetting. And then even I had a master's student who couldn't. He went to a high-end Eastern school, and he came in and he couldn't write. And he went to the English department. He took all the classes in English. He got A's, all the writing classes in English. Still couldn't write. So I had the English professor come, the technical writing professor come and be on his thesis committee, and because I wanted to find out how he got an A in this class. And he said, oh, we don't teach the nuts and bolts of writing anymore. That restricts the students. So again, maybe I'm old school, but reading and writing are really where it's about. And so I think that within the institution, there's that's been very disturbing, those two things.
Okay. What I want to do is open it up to the audience. What questions do you have for our panel? They provided us with really good insight and some recommendations, but I wanted to, if there's any questions that you guys have.
All right. I'm curious if anybody has tried any of the flipped classroom methods or strategies, and if so, how do you get students to do, like you guys are saying, do the things outside that they need to do to then be prepared for activities or discussions or anything in the classroom?
Any takers?
I don't do a fully flipped classroom, but I do have to have students read before they come to class so we can have discussions and do activities. So I think it's in the same realm. And that has been a struggle. I have an advanced poetry workshop right now, and we're reading some pretty challenging texts. And I think some students would read a portion of it and be frustrated by it and give up. And I can understand how frustrating that experience would be. And this is probably something that most people already do, but I began preparing questions in advance to accompany the reading so they'd have some hand-holding. So they'd have some kind of encouragement and some kind of framework to make it through some of those challenging texts. I don't know if it was a dramatic improvement in discussions afterward, but giving them at least that framework, I think, helped them feel supported so that that frustration was mitigated to some factor. I don't know if that fully answers your question.
So just to restate, establishing some soft or hard scaffolds to help structure kind of, here's what at least you need to be looking for,
Right.
gather in preparation.
What I do is I bring professionals into my classroom, and they kind of talk to the students about how important it is to do well in their college and to understand this topic in order to make it out into the world, to work hard. You work hard, but you have a nice lifestyle afterwards. So the professional, because they can look at me and just roll their eyes. I'm like the mom. But when the professionals come in, they like to listen to them. Because the professionals will say, I thought this class was, wouldn't get me anywhere, and I just sat back there in the corner and didn't really listen, but I wish I would have done it differently. And so I do have professionals come in and talk about the importance of, learning.
Yeah. So that recommendation could be is having folks come in that have some street cred, I guess you could say, to help instill the value of either the topic, the content, or the overall course.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
I don't do a flipped classroom here, but I did at my last university. And again, adult learning theory, we know that adults like to have some control and ownership over what they're doing. So we spent the first part of class talking about why we were doing flipped classroom. They generated lists of why that would be beneficial to them, what they thought the distractions or the downsides would be for them. We talked about how they would hold themselves, how I would hold them accountable. So by giving them a role in sort of setting up the parameters of the flipped classroom, I think it helped them engage, but it certainly gave us a much better platform to talk about it if they didn't engage, because they helped create those rules.
So just to restate that, having established rules and roles for the members of the group, I guess, and then what I kind of distilled a little bit out of that was what, especially with this generation of learners, our incoming generation and the current one we have, is we need to provide a better rationale of why we're doing what we're doing. They don't really trust us. Just take my word for it. They're not going to take our word for it anymore. So providing them with concrete examples of this is where you're going to see this coming up in the curriculum or in practice or whatever. So yeah. Other thoughts from the panel? Or?
I think you have to put some teeth into the flipped classroom concept. And so one of the things that I've done in the past is that I make sure that the students are prepared to go into the laboratory, for instance, in regard to, have you watched a video? Have you done this particular assignment related to what structures you're going to learn today? And I quiz them when they come in orally, and they don't like that. Because it puts them right on the spot, and eventually their colleagues learn that, if you don't read your stuff, you're going to be in trouble because you're going to be put on the spot. And so I think you have to always balance the idea of rigor and fairness when you're doing that student learning.
Yeah, and I think that idea of accountability is something that's transcended a lot of what folks have said already, is holding students accountable regardless of the pedagogy or technology that we're using in order to, again, facilitate learning. But that accountability piece is what I would consider a soft skill that we need to have outside of any educational practice we have, but any professional role that our students are transitioning to. Was that helpful? Those responses? Any other questions from the group? They're in the middle.
So our students come in with different backgrounds, different histories, different levels of prior knowledge, and during the semester they all experience a different life, if you will, outside constraints. What do you do within the semester to normalize the educational experience for each of your students, given all of that different things that impacts the learning environment?
That's a good question.
I'll start. What I've done, I know that everyone learns at a different pace, and so there'll be times I'll do a couple workshops, additional workshops, where if students are having problems, but I won't hold them unless there's about at least 5 people there. So I hold them accountable in coming. But I do realize that some people are busier than others, and if they're struggling, I'll hold definitely another lecture, in a different classroom.
I do a similar thing. I don't say there has to be 5, but I say there has to be somebody.
Yeah.
Because again, we are asynchronously online, and so I do optional, if students are interested, video conferences with students individually, obviously, if they want it, but in groups as well to reinforce concepts, things people are struggling with. Sometimes those are bubbled up from the students, and sometimes they're bubbled up from what I see in assignments.
The strategy that I've used is that I give them guidance. You know, in health professions, we have this plan of care for patients. We treat patients, and they have a plan of care, and I call that a plan of learning to the students. And so you might give them 4 or 5 objectives, but then give them particular ways in which they can accomplish those objectives, 3 or 4 alternatives that allows them to choose which way they can get that learning. Can it be study groups? Can it be going in and talking to Alex? Can it be going in and talking to the TAs? Can it be extra time in the laboratory, whether it's physiology or clinical procedures? And I think that sets a focus for that particular learning. And that's been successful, I think, for some students.
I tried to build in reflection for students. So after each assignment, I ask them what they learned from it, what they struggled with, and then what skill they learned on an earlier assignment that they brought forward to this one. And I think by making those skills visible to them, they realize that they are transferring skills forward, whereas without that time for reflection, things might feel just like disconnected assignments, or that each assignment is a new self-contained thing. So I really want to make visible kind of the trajectory of their learning.
Okay, helpful. Other questions? One more question from the group.
I'm assuming Bethany does this from what she's going to cover a little bit, but I'm curious, how do you maximize effectiveness of like teacher conferences when I have a course where they come and they're showing me where they are at in their annotated bibliography, and they're also showing me where they're at in their presentation. Some come extremely prepared, some want me to write it for them, and I want to maximize that as a collaborative experience, better prepare them to come to that conference, and I'm wondering if you have ideas of how to do that.
Making them accountable for that preparation is, I think, a difficult part. I think having strict time limits on the conference, but maybe having multiple conferences has been helpful for me. So if they come unprepared and we only have 6 minutes to talk, then they realize that by minute 6, we're just starting to get where they need to be. And so if they get a second chance conference later, then hopefully that first attempt demonstrates to them that they do need to actually bring something, or it'll be an awkward experience for them. So that's, I used to have longer conference times, but only one of them in the semester. And this semester in my composition class, I'm conferencing with students about 3 times. The first 2 are just 5-minute timed conferences, and the last one's a longer one. Or hopefully by that point we've built up enough of a relationship in that conference that we can have something more useful at the end. So I think they're scared coming into conference a lot of the time too, and they don't know what to expect. So maybe it's kind of like the idea of low stakes writing, that if we have the smaller assignments, then when we get to the bigger ones,